Well, hello, this is Jeff Gaudiosi, and you're on misplacedstraws.com where music comes to life. My guest today is a true legend of Los Angeles. For nearly 40 years and over 14 records, he and his band have carried the swagger of the Sunset Strip. LA Guns is about to release their 15th record, Leppard Skin, and it really is one of their best. Please welcome Tracii Guns. Welcome, Tracii.
Hey Jeff, man, nice to be with you today.
Now, since the reunion in 2017, you guys have not only put out consistent releases, but consistently great releases. I mean, after all this time, what still drives you to create new music while your peers are happy just kind of reliving the past?
I think when you're a musician, at a certain level, the creativity is such an important part of being a musician. For example, in my case, like I'm not great at learning other people's guitar solos or even chords and songs, so I'm definitely more of a creative guitar player. So basically that's just what I do personally, and I guess, it's really considered a hobby, when you're addicted to, the thing that you love to do outside of your everyday normal
Yeah.
kind of routine. Um, but yeah, I think that part of the hobby or part of the craft or whatever you want to call it is always trying to create something interesting, trying not to do the same thing twice, and, really putting your heart and your time into it. And that's the only thing I hyper focus on is music.
Mhm.
So like once I'm committed to doing something, it gets 100% of my attention, for the couple 3 months, that I'm involved in it.
Mhm. And to, there's a lot on this record that I think really stands out. And, starting with just the vibe of it. Now, the last four records to me have really kind of built upon each other. It each one started where the last one left off and then evolved into
Yeah,
something new and it went on. But Leopard
that's right.
Skin is a total left turn, but in the best possible way. You know,
Right.
I, I think the last ones were a little heavier musically, a little darker. This
Yeah.
one is monster riffs, a very punk feel. Did you say like, okay, I'm just going to do something completely new and different, or was it just a natural evolution?
Well, I think that, with me as the dominant songwriter, music creator in the band, that, I can easily go down a road that's, simple for me. And that's within the metal realm, like metal, I'm known as a metal guitarist. So, doing metal is already validated, and, I'm good at it and I can do that. But then there's a personal thing too, and for me personally, I have to validate what I'm doing, and not that I haven't validated the past things, but all the stuff on this record is stuff that I'm equally as into as metal, you know. And we've dabbled in all kinds of stuff through all the records, all the records are different. But this one really has a happier, more up tempo, swingy kind of thing about it. And don't get us wrong. There's some very depressing music on this record, but but overall, it's really about rock and roll and what rock and roll is and our definition of it. And I was really up to the challenge because I was in a great mood when I was writing the stuff, and had a really good time writing and recording it. There was a lot of challenges in it, and that always makes it better for me, because when something's challenging, you don't know, what's going to be recorded 10 minutes later.
Right.
And it's like, oh man, what do I do here? And when you come up with stuff in a challenging kind of way, it's very satisfying to come up with something cool.
It's interesting to hear you talk about challenging because this doesn't sound like a band going through the motions after 40 years. To my ears, this record is a throwback to kind of the hungry sound and feel of that first record. I mean, a band
Yeah.
that's, kind of looking to punch you in the face and move on to the next town. Is that also a function too of, the core of you, Ace, and Johnny musically? You guys gel so well. Does it allow you as a writer to expand what you're bringing to the band?
Well, they definitely, especially Johnny and Ace, they really inspire me to look at what LA Guns is. If they weren't there, we're in danger of writing some seriously, kind of drab, music that a 59-year-old guy would write. You know what I mean? So they're very inspiring to me. So, in a lot of ways, I always make the records for the band. You know what I mean? For us, like, what do we want to hear? What don't we have that's new in our record collections that we need to have? And I always consider Johnny and Ace because they're more old school LA Guns than Phil and I are. There's no doubt about it. And that's why they're here. They love the band. They love what the band stands for, and it's just a breath of fresh air, as is this album. I really wanted to do something for everybody, and like the song "Hit and Run," that's Johnny's music. He brought it in, and then I got to whip out all the tools and weird amps and pedals and stuff, and kind of go to town. So yeah, I mean, those guys are everybody has a role in this band that makes this band happen.
It's when you mentioned Hit and Runs, my favorite song on the record. So I'm glad to hear you mention that.
Yeah, ours too. That's the band's favorite. And by the way, I don't know when this is coming out, but Apple Music leaked that song today.
Oh, really?
2 days early. Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing that grabs me about this record is the production on it. And I think if there was one knock on the last couple records, is that the production at times got a little bogged down and muddy, whereas this one is very bright, it's very open, it's loud and clear. What changes did you make on that end?
Well, that's a real conscious decision too, as were the past records are heavier and definitely, when I'm doing metal, when I'm writing metal, it's not just like influences of Randy Rhoads and Judas Priest and Maiden. I love stoner rock. I love doom metal and stuff like that, which is muddier. It's thicker and fuzzier on the bottom end with that big giant kick drum kind of driving everything. And that's definitely a production mentality that I have when it comes to writing the heavier stuff. Like, I want it to be heavy. I want it to be real heavy. But the guitars take up a lot of the space on those records. They're heavy. They're thick, and I mean, even though in technical terms we do EQ the bottom end out of the guitars, the music's just written that way, and that's how it's recorded. On something like this, where it's really basic back to the Telecaster, the Les Paul, and a Marshall. Like, that's it. And then the other stuff you hear on there is even lighter amps. Fender amps, Silvertone amps. I use a Swarth little amp. I use all this cool stuff, and no distortion pedals. So you're really getting the honest sound of the guitars. And what that does is it removes all those distortion pedal frequencies and allows room for everything else that's going on to really be clear and really be in your face and bright, and that's why I think this record's going to appeal to a lot more people, because it does have this sense of, not everybody's as dark as my soul is. You know what I mean? So, and I realize that. So, creating something like this it's a breath of fresh air. It's like the band's coming up for air for a minute to say, hey, we're a rock and roll band.
And getting into some of the songs, the first two singles, Taste It and Lucky Motherfucker, I mean, the riffs grab you. And it shows right away, okay, this is a different kind of LA Guns record. But I think when the grinder hits is when the record explodes. I mean, talk a little bit about that track and just that snarling guitar sound you get in that.
Yeah, that the grinder, that's my personal favorite,
Mm,
because that's obvious, like we were talking about earlier,
yeah,
it's muddy, it's
yeah,
it's dark,
yeah,
and it's explosive. The interesting thing about that is it started out as like this really grungy kind of riff with big bar chords
mm,
and playing a low
yeah,
fifth on top of the chords, which makes things muddy and heavy. But then I overdubbed a slide track over everything. And
mm,
then I was listening back, I'm going, wait, let me double that slide track and do some more slide. And then I just removed all the rhythm guitars.
yeah,
So what's left is just, these kind of not perfectly aligned slide guitar tracks that make it really greasy and really sleazy sound. Um, and then it's got the couple little Led Zeppelin style
yeah,
changes in it that really are a throwback to that Zeppelin one, late Yardbirds kind of thing. And yeah, when I finished recording the guitars on that, I was definitely dancing around the studio going, oh yeah, because I've never heard anything like it. I've never heard anything, a slide song done like that ever.
yeah,
So
it's amazing.
that's personal victory.
Yeah, yeah. Another track too, I think that stands out, "Runaway Train." We
Mm-hmm.
rarely get to hear you play that kind of style on record, and I
Yeah.
think I just love the fact that as a band, you guys aren't afraid to put something like that on there because it works. I mean, at the end of the day, it's LA Guns
Oh
still.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And I do often post things like that online.
Yeah.
Like, I'll do 30 seconds of like some open tuning or slide or something. And but what inspired me to, create a whole song out of it. Like normally I wouldn't because it's such a specific old-timey
Yeah.
kind of sound, and can you do something original with it? That's always the question with
Mm.
everything. Can I do something original with this? Can I twist this in a way where it's personal? And I was watching Reacher, and he loves old blues,
Yep.
like going back to the late 20s
Mm.
and moving forward. And that damn Blind Blake song, I think it's like, Policeman Blues or something. It's got this really weird tuning. It's not a typical open blues tuning. I'm like, I haven't heard this song in a long time. And like, what is that tuning? So I learned the tuning and I just started messing around with it. And I came up with the little choo choo train part, which is really kind of sounds like Viva Las Vegas,
Yeah.
moving like that. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not what this tuning is all about. But it's definitely a hook in the song. And then I came up with all those chromatic slide parts behind it,
Mm.
and that's where it became, our personality or my personality, whatever. And I got it to Adam, our studio drummer, and he went right straight for the snare drum. Like this is a train song. And oddly enough, I had recorded these like, I don't know what they'd be considered, like eighth scale trains. Trains my kid and my
Mm.
little kid in Denmark. We took him to this train place this one day, and like those little trains that sounded so good.
Mm.
I recorded them. This is
Mm.
like 3 or 4 years ago, and I had the samples on my phone, and I flew those in there and got everything done. Sent it off to Phil and Mitch Davis, his writing partner.
Mm.
And when those vocals came back, I was like,
Yeah.
God damn, a lily white British guy, man. They do blues good. He just nailed it, and his song really does stick out. And I'm glad that I followed through with it. In the beginning, my girlfriend and I just called it the "fuck yeah" train. With like we knew it was going to go on the record, but doesn't belong on the record, kind of a thing. And then once the vocals were done, it was like obvious, like wow, this is a great LA Gun song.
And there's an urgency, I think, to all of these songs that really begs them to be performed live. Now, you guys are about to start the tour, and of course, there's the giant list of tracks that you have to hear in
Yeah.
every LA Gun show. But have you thought about what songs from this record you're going to work into the set?
Yeah, we're talking about that right now because we're getting ready to go. So there will be two. We're gonna pick two. And yeah, I mean, every time I put out a record, there's like seven I want to do, live. But we just It's impossible. I mean, without putting an audience completely to sleep, we're not a band that plays 2.5, 3 hours. We never were, we never will be. And we got to get to the good stuff. You know what I mean? We got to get there because it's a high energy band. But yeah, there will be two. And yes, I agree with you. When you listen to this record, they all sound like live songs. And Adam and I are getting real good at that, at making the record sound like it's a live band. There's a little some sorcery involved in getting that done, but we're getting better at it.
Now, when you look back, I mentioned this is your 15th record. I mean, other than Leopard Skin, is there a song or an album that you think is the best representation of what you had in your head for LA Guns?
I think Waking the Dead.
Record.
Yeah, I think Waking the Dead is the most spot on collection of songs that represent all the aspects of LA Guns, and the recording is impeccable. Andy Johns produced that. He's arguably the best rock engineer of all time. So the sound is just, my God. So you mix the sound with the great songs and riffs. That is the one. But on the flip side, I think Checkered Past, with like songs like Let You Down and things like that are really deep and really, I call them kind of suicide ballads, and not murder ballads, but suicide. Like, we're good at those too. So we don't do that live though, because it's just like, we played Let You Down like a few times, and like the crowd just wanted to cry. It's like, all right, that's not what LA Guns is about, overall. But we're good at it. But I would have to say Waking the Dead is the chef's kiss of our catalog.
Well, and it's funny, we did not work this out beforehand, but that's actually in my notes of what I was going to suggest, because that's always been my favorite LA Guns record.
Awesome. It's the one I listen to the most. Like when we're on tour and I just want to listen, like there's just something about that record. Can't put my finger on it.
Now, your history, the band's history, has always been such an integral part of that LA scene and sound. And nowadays, people can create music sort of in their room or in a studio without even ever playing live before their record comes out. But do you think it helped you as a young band to have that giant level of competitiveness and rivalry with all of those other LA bands and sort of that fight to survive? Do you think that helped you, as opposed to being able to sit in a room and just kind of create music without having to go out and play it?
Well, the scene growing up, like watching Rat and Motley Crue and Lost in particular, right before we started, that was important. It was like they set the bar for what new heavy rock was, and I was 16, 15, 16, watching it. And so that was the level of intensity. And when you're that age, 15, 16 years old, you're able to hyper focus and, kind of, you believe in what you're doing, and everybody else is stupid. And, you're 15, 16 years old. I benefited from that, because there was nobody ever was going to tell me what I was going to do musically at that point. So I was very focused. And then I met Mick Cripps, and Mick is a little older, and he had his slightly different take on, what makes music great. And he's the one that really introduced me to heavy doses of Johnny Thunders and, some other, the Babysitters and some other bands from England that he was really into, Lords of the New Church, stuff like that, So he really got me into that stuff. I ended up playing with Johnny Thunders, like this is a big part of the end of my teenage years was getting to know these people, understanding that music and incorporating it into all the Randy Rhoads riffing. You know what I mean? So like, we have this crazy balance of like, wow, like I can do this, but I love this, kind of a thing. Which makes for a unique blend. And the one thing, like I just posted some Guns N' Roses stuff I did live, like in a rehearsal situation. When I heard that, it was so I'd never heard it before. So when I heard it for the first time, I really realized how that combination worked between Izzy and I.
Yep.
Because actually I should have talked about Izzy before Mick, but same thing.
Yeah.
Where Izzy had this very Andy McCoy, Keith Richards kind of sound going on one side, which was agreed upon that that's what we were going to do. But when I was listening to me, it was all Randy Rhoads, man. It was like wow, listen to that combination, working together. And that's what set us apart from the competition, because you had guys just doing metal, and then you guys had just doing kind of trashy rock. Yeah. Equally as cool, but why not do both? Right. That was my thought process. And even in Guns N' Roses and LA Guns later, that was always the thought process, is like, one part Joe Perry, one part Gary Moore. You know what I mean? Like, how do you put that together? And that's why, I believe that, musically, LA Guns and Guns N' Roses was really different from everybody else, because you couldn't say we were like Motley Crue, and you couldn't say we were like the Dolls. They were things that were on their own.
Yeah, without a doubt. And when I spoke to Phil for the last record, he said at that time he felt the band had one more in them. He wasn't sure if it would go on past 5 records of this reunion. What do you see as the future of the band?
I think that, Phil will go as long as he's feeling healthy. As long as he's banging it out like he just banged this one out. But I've noticed that a lot of my peers that are feeling older, they've all, there's not many of them, like 4 or 5, have said to me, well, get into this place, and then I'm going to stop, and this has been going on for 10 years with some people I know, and they keep going, and they keep coming up with great stuff. And, the one thing I would say to any aging rock stars that are thinking about not doing it is, like, you're going to age really fast when you stop. Mm-hmm. This is what keeps us young. This is what keeps us vibrant. And it keeps our brain active, and with the travel schedules and things like that, it's putting the juices to work, So I don't make predictions, but I will definitely be doing this until my number comes up. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah. Well, and about, you've had a lot of bands outside of LA Guns over the years. Would you consider putting a new project together, or even 20 years in the waiting follow-up as a solo record?
Yeah, I'm always open to, putting people together and making music, and, to what degree. The issue with it is it never plays live, So for me to do something, the next thing that I would do outside LA Guns would be to do live. You know what I mean? I don't want to do any more albums that only people listen to in headphones. It's like, okay, it's cool, it's fun, it's creative, I get to do it. But in a band way, I reach out to people from time to time and, get their temperature and, what they are thinking about doing. And you never know, man. I reach out to some cool people.
Well, we've been spending some time here with Tracii Guns. The band is LA Guns. The record is called Leopard Skin. It's out everywhere April 4th. I think it's probably one of my top 3 favorite LA Guns records already. I've been listening to it pretty constantly. So, Tracii, best of luck. Can't wait to catch you guys on the road when you come around here in the Northeast. And we'll talk soon.
Yep. All right. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thanks.